Hello and welcome friends, I am That Happy Viking and I would like to present to you my set review of Ikoria for Gentry. If you have no idea what Gentry is, check the description below this video for more information. In this episode, we will be looking at the white cards. Let's go! Let's get to it. We're gonna walk through every card and I am going to comment on where I think it will find its place in Gentry. Blade Banish, 4 mana instant, exile target creature with power 4 or greater. Is the kind of sideboard card that we might see emerging, probably played as a 1 or 2 of in some more controlling decks. We've seen the sorcery exile target creature with power 4 or greater cards played in some sideboards from Return to Ravnica. I lost the name now. It's like bring to something. So I am expecting to see this, but it's a mild upgrade rather than a big impact. Checkpoint Officer, 2 mana 1/2 that can tap a creature for 2 mana. Very underwhelming. The format would need to warp towards big mutate things very heavily for this to be relevant. Coordinated Charge, creatures you control get +2/+1 on an instant with cycling. The kind of deck that want these kinds of effects are really aggressive and usually don't want to wait until turn 5. So adding cycling on top of an effect that costs 3 mana or even 2 mana if you want to go uncommon, I don't think this will be played. Cup Warden, a 4 mana 3/4 that can mutate for 4, so no discount. With lifelink, whenever this creature mutates, create 2 1/1 cat creature tokens with lifelink. So having this as at rare probably puts it outside the range of what people want to play. There are some really good mutate white creatures. Vulpikeed is one of them, for example, that synergizes really well with this, and it allows you to go white while you go big. That said, power level wise it's probably a bit lower. There's a lot of other really good options for you in that slot, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it, but I think usually people will have better options. 4 mana 3/3, you get a 1/1 human soldier when it comes into play. Again, decks that want this kind of effect usually want to have a clock, a bigger presence, so having the options that are 3 mana 2/2s that give you a 1/1 are just straight up better. Divine Arrow, 2 mana instant, deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature, is a reprint from War of the Spark, and before that. It is sometimes played now, usually out of sideboards. It's a decent card, and it'll probably have the same slot sort of in Gentry to come. Granite Healer, whenever you cycle another card, you gain 1 life, and it cycles itself. I think of all the cycling enablers, that's not really super interesting to have in Gentry. We have the mono white life gain deck, but I don't think it will want to incorporate a cycling engine. There's already way too many good cards that are fighting for their slots there. Granite Magistrate, as a rare, 2 mana 1/3, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. This is the escape hoser. Anti-strategies on your rare slot in Gentry are usually not that interesting, and having something that has so little impact against an opponent that doesn't do any of these shenanigans is just not worth it in Gentry. White as 1. For 1 mana instant, target human you control gets +1/+1 and indestructible. Target non-human creature you control gets +1/+1 and indestructible. You can choose one or both. This is definitely playable. Let's just throw it out there like that. We already see God's Willing being played. We see Kerametra's Blessing being played, and we even see I'll say it of Life, I think the name is, being played as pretty much an onboard trick for this. This does most of what those cards do just as well, and in a lot of cases even better or less restrictive. So I do expect to see this being played. Flourishing Fox is the other cycling enabler in white. Uncommon 1-mana 1/1. Whenever you cycle another card, put a +1/+1 counter on Flourishing Fox. For this to start as a 1/1 without good abilities on top of it, I don't think there's enough support in Gentry for cycling to be worth it, because you put your eggs in one basket, almost literally, and there's a lot of non-conditional removal because people want to be ready for the bigger creatures. So I wouldn't be surprised to see people try this, but I think more straight up aggro things is going to be a better choice. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see people build this and prove me wrong. Garrison Cat, whenever it dies, create a 1/1 white human soldier token. Is not only a decent aggro option, but also very interesting for decks that want a sacrifice outlet. We already have the 1/1 that gives you a 1/1 lifelink, so which is functionally better, unless the creature type is important to you. Cats are cats. I only see this played if you really want to go all in on that sacrifice theme, which I'm already dreaming about. Black-white aristocrats is not all that unlikely. Elekid Glider is our Nightmare Squirrel, 3 mana for a 2/2. You get to choose if it has flying or first strike. I don't think this cuts it in Gentry on your 3 slot for something like this that is pretty much only going to be played in somewhat aggressive decks. There are so many better options that I don't think it's going to be relevant. Huntmaster Liger is your 4 mana 3/4 mutate 3, so you do get a discount on this one. Whenever this mutates, other creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. And here we see the Go White Cat theme together with the rare we saw before emerging. And this is a kind of deck that wants to go tall and wide at the same time. So if that is going to be your strategy, if you do want to go for a bunch of tokens that are supported by one big thing, then this might be a good choice. But to be honest, it's only really interesting if you hit that second mutate, if you can give +2/+2, and at that point you're again putting a lot of your resources on one permanent for somebody to get rid of. So again, I think it's a deck, but I think other options are better. I'm actually reading all the chat, so I can cut out some parts. Yes, everything is going onto YouTube. That is why I'm ignoring it. That is why there's no face cam. That is why everything is barren. There was this bear and this rabbit. Okay, let's continue. Imposing Vantasaur, 6 mana 3/6 with vigilance and has cycling. Pretty much only playable in the cycling enabled decks if somebody is going to go for it. I'm not sure you want something like this if you have so many other good options. Keensight Mentor, put a vigilance counter on target non-human creature you control, and you can put a +1/+1 creature on each creature you control with vigilance. This is the first one of a cycle. that gives a ability counter and then puts +1/+1 counters on each creature you control with said ability. Here we want to look at what's the upfront investment and what's the benefit you're getting from this. Vigilance gets you a very strong defensive bonus, but do you really care about it if you are playing mono white? Like, there is not really a toughness matters deck floating around now, even though we have the Watley that as a passive lets you deal damage equal to your toughness, and the what's it, I think it's High Alert, yeah, the blue-white enchantment that lets you do the same thing. So there might be a theme here that's possible. We also have the 0/5, we'll see that one later, the 0/5 blue, I think it's a turtle or a crab. So this might become a thing if that deck hits off. Otherwise, on its own, not that interesting. Lavabrink Venturer, 3 mana 3/3 as a rare. If it enters the battlefield, you choose odd or even, and it has protection from each converted mana cost of the chosen value. As a rare, I don't think the power level is there at all. We already have a better comparable card in the previous set, in the 6/1 Achilles wannabe that gets protection from everything except a certain converted mana cost, which I think is straight up better. Of course, that's one is red and white. But no, I don't think this one is playable. Light of Hope gives you 4 life, destroys an enchantment, or puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature for 1 single mana. Now, currently, we have a meta game where most white creatures are playing Disenchant on the side, but there is barely any artifacts that you really want to hit. So replacing your Disenchants with the Light of Hope is shaving off a mana while getting flexibility in your abilities. I do expect to see this in sideboards, and I do expect, if that happens, that people will put more value on artifacts and start looking for strategies around artifacts. The biggest one currently would be Witch's Oven, which will just keep Light of Hope out of sideboards in favor of Disenchant. Luminous Broodmoth, Jesus, is a 4 mana 3/4 flying, which is already impressive. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. This card is insane. You can build entire strategies around this card. Even if you don't build around this card and you just drop this into a mono white aggro deck, you're rebuying all your creatures with flying is insane. I expect this to be one of the more played white cards in the Gentry rare mythic slot for the next year and a half. That's just how good this card is and in how many decks it can find a home. Majestic Oricorn is a 5 mana 4/4, mutates for 4. So here we have the discount again. That has vigilance. Whenever this mutates, you gain 4 life. Again, putting vigilance on a creature, not the super value. Whenever this mutates, you gain 4 life, is somewhat interesting against mono red, but against mono red you don't want to be paying 4 mana in order to upgrade a creature rather than just add a creature to the board. So I don't think this is interesting. Main Serval, 2 mana 1/4 vigilance. Once upon a time you needed 3 mana to get a 1/4 vigilance. Now you're getting the deal for 2. This card, if the Toughness Matters deck happens, is going to be a staple in it for sure. And even in other decks, I can see people boarding this in for defense against mono white. mono red, sorry. The protection this gives against all the 1-drops that they have is just huge. And having 4 toughness means that none of their removal spells get rid of it in a 1-for-1, so they have to trade a creature. The attack that doesn't deal damage to you and the burn spell for this one, I wouldn't be surprised to see this in sideboard. Mythos of Snapdax. Besides having a silly name, it costs 4 mana. Each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from the non-land permanents they control, and sacrifices the rest. If red and black was spent to cast this spell, you choose the permanent for each player instead. I like the best case scenario for this spell is pretty good. But don't forget, you have to leave them with one of each of those things. And with how a lot of good decks aim to diversify their threats, that's going to mean that you're going to have to leave a lot on the board against good decks. So this card is one that will decimate softer decks, very linear decks, but will be a near dead card against very well thought of diverse decks, and for that reason I don't think it's worth it. Pacifism is a reprint, it's a staple, it just deals with a bunch of things in a way that they aren't used to be dealt with. This is a big example of this is the Gates decks that have Gate Colossus as a recurring engine. If it's pacified, it stays pacified. Not caring about the size of a creature for 2 mana is a pretty big deal. And the fact that it can get destroyed to release the creature again doesn't need to be that big of a problem. So, solid card, will be a player in Gentry if always from the sideboard, and never really that exciting. Patagia or Patagia, or however you want to pronounce it, Tiger, is a 5 mana 3/4 flying. When it enters the battlefield, target human you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn, which is pretty much an effect you want in an aggro deck in which you don't want to be paying 5 mana for this kind of effect. Perimeter Sergeant, I can't talk anymore, as a 3 mana 3/2. Whenever it attacks other humans you control, get +1/+0 until end of turn. Could be playable in a go white tokeny deck that currently is missing a little bit of the support, but is getting a lot of that in Ikoria. So the next card already shows that one. Humans you control get +1/+1 on an enchantment that costs 3. So you get your Crusade effect there. And for 2 mana and 2 tapped humans, you can tap target creature an opponent controls. So combining this with the Vigilance Giving, for example, and possible go wide strategies, this could be a really solid card, though the second ability is a bit dead against most control decks. Sapphire Sabertooth is a 2 mana 3/1. This has been printed and reprinted over and over and over again. And in Gentry, with what we see now with Cat Oven being a thing, it barely makes an impact, not having any evasion, dying to any block, and lots of decks having ways of interacting very early game because you just need to. This is barely playable, but in the best case scenario helps those huge blowout starts. Snare Tactician is a 3 mana 2/3. Whenever you cycle, tap target creature an opponent controls. 3 mana, we really want to have more than a 2/3 body. You need to invest more mana to get the first effect, and unless you have a whole bunch of cycling triggers, I don't think this is where you want to go with it. Could be a sideboard card to fight the mid-rangey, slightly slower decks, but I don't expect to see this in main boards at all. Solid Footing A 1 mana flash aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and as long as it has vigilance, it assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So here we see the vigilance and toughness matters come back, this time on a very cheap aura and a common. The other cards we have so far are uncommons, but give the effect to all your creatures. So depending on how stressed that deck will be on their uncommons, this might see play in it. But that's a big if. Currently, it hasn't really been a deck that's been played, but getting a turn 1 0/5 and then throwing this on it for a 6 power, technically 6 powered attack is pretty strong. That won't have vigilance though. Yeah, it's so we have the cat then. The 1/4 cat gets +1/+1 and attacks on turn 3 for 5 with vigilance. Pretty strong, but is it enough to build a deck around? Splendor Mare is a 3/3 lifelink for 3, solid body for the cost, and has cycling 2 mana. When you cycle it, you put a lifelink counter on target creature you control. As I said, solid card, but hard to put into a strategy. If you do find the combo where a creature would go crazy with lifelink, like something that deals damage to both opponents, for example, would be really strong, then this goes up by a lot in value in Gentry. For now, I don't think it fits in any particular strategy well enough. Maybe mono white life gain to put lifelink onto your Ajari's Pridemate, but that deck is already very much pinched on their uncommons as it is. Spontaneous Flight. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Put a flying counter on it. This effect on 3 mana just doesn't cut it for the aggro decks that will want to play it. Usually that one-time burst of getting +2/+2 and flying for a mana less without the counter is just going to be way better. Stormwild Caprador is a 3 mana 1/3 bird goat, has flying. If non-combat damage will be dealt to Caprador, prevent that damage, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each 1 damage prevented this way. This is a huge insert Trump quote here, stop sign for mono red, but outside of that matchup it doesn't really do that much. So if the meta game shifts really heavily to mono red, or somebody finds a build where they are doing again damage to all sorts of permanents, then this might be a thing, but I feel like it's too fragile and too convoluted at this point to really make a deck out of it. Swallow Whole. 1 mana sorcery as an additional cost to cast. Tap an untapped creature you control. Exile target tapped creature. Put a +1/+1 counter on the creature tapped to pay this spell's additional cost. First, a misunderstanding is some people seem to think this counters the spell if the creature you tapped goes away, because you have to put a +1/+1 counter on it to pay its additional cost. That's not how it works. The effect just checks for the creature you tapped to pay its costs, and then we'll put a +1/+1 counter on it as part of the effect. To clear that up. Then, is this card actually good? It's very, very conditional. This is a sorcery spell, which means it only works if your opponent is also attacking you, and invites them to interact with you on their terms, pretty much. In addition, you need a untapped creature to cast it yourself. So again, if you're playing that vigilance deck, that's not much of a cost. Otherwise, this could be pretty problematic. This is really good against the kind of decks that build up a big creature or have big creatures that they're aiming to protect. But outside of that, and it being an uncommon, I don't think it's that good, even though it looks really good. Point of note is you can tap a creature with Summoning Sickness for the additional cost. So that does increase the value of the spell by quite a bit. But again, white decks that want to play this, that can play this, are the white-based aggro decks, and those are already pretty stressed on their uncommons as it is. Valiant Rescuer. Whenever you cycle another card for the first time each turn, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. That's a 2 mana 3/1 that cycles himself. So here we see the enabler for both the humans and cycling spells that really want to build up this white base and then hope to do something with it. You can go wide and high by going the mutate plan with some of the options you have, that when they mutate, they buff the entire team. Or you can choose to just go wide and buff the entire team. That's in either case, it's a really interesting card to have, and one I do expect to see people try and break in token-focused decks. Probably with a human theme, since humans are really strong if they get in bigger numbers. And then that Swallow Whole becomes more interesting because you always have an untapped creature hanging around on your board. So there's definitely a theme there. Vulpikeet is a 4 mana 2/3 flying with mutate 3, so you get the discount. Whenever this creature mutates, put a +1/+1 counter on it. This card is going to be played in Gentry, period. This is not a 2/3 flying for 4 mana. This is a 3/4 flying creature for 3 mana that gets the abilities of the creatures you played before it. And if you have some of the mutate enablers coming before it, it could be a whole lot scarier than a 3/4 flying for 4 mana. I love this card. I think this is probably the best white card in the set. You heard it here first. It's going to be so embarrassing if nobody plays it. I will play it just to get started. And then last in the white cards, we have Will of the All Hunter. It's an instant 2 mana. Target creature gets +2/+2. If it's blocking, instead put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Has cycling as well. But, and that's a big but, is that it is uncommon. So again, all the white aggro decks already very pinched on their uncommon slots. Might want to look at this, but as long as you don't want to be blocking with that deck. And if you're blocking, it's either because you're losing or because you're winning anyway elsewhere. I don't think there's much incentive to play Will of the All Hunter unless we find something that really cares about having those +1/+1 counters.